I have a very useful tip for everybody. Stay on this mission screen when you minimize the app, so that when you come back to the app, like this, and then you press the back button, your game will actually sync with the server. And if your game has any skill triggers, so your Pokemon has any skill triggers, that would definitely be on your Pokemon banked, so that you don't have to worry about collecting productions like berries and ingredients, but not collecting skills because the game hasn't synced with the server. Let me explain what I mean by that. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. Have you ever noticed that sometimes when you open the game from a minimized status, so you haven't actually shut down the game, you've just minimized it, when you collect the productions on your Pokemon like this, sometimes if you wait about a minute and come back, the skill can trigger. You click on the same Pokemon again, suddenly Walrein is triggering its ingredient magnet. Well, why is that? For some time, people thought that that was because skill is independently calculated, but the prevailing theory is that a skill has a chance to trigger every time a production is produced. So for example, a berry is produced or an ingredient is produced, there's a 5 or 10 or 15% chance that a skill can trigger. So why is it that this happens when you have entered the game from a minimized status? It doesn't happen when you close the game, completely shut down the game, and then restart it from the main screen. Well, that's because berries and ingredients seem to be calculated locally on your device, on your app, whereas skills are calculated on the server side. So if you open the app and immediately clicked on your Pokemon to collect their productions like this, the game may not know that you've got a skill trigger banked and ready to trigger. For about 20, 30, or maybe 50 seconds, when you come back and then you realize, hang on, there's something that you haven't collected, you click on it again and suddenly the skill triggers. And we've got some evidence of this because we know now that you cannot trigger a skill if you have no internet connection. On the other hand, if you were to collect berries without an internet connection, that's not a problem. In fact, we utilize that to our advantage to know ahead of time whether someone will trigger a main skill. For example, I can predict whether Wigglytuff will trigger a main skill by turning off the internet connection and then try to trigger it, and if it triggers, it will automatically restart my game. The game won't let me actually apply that trigger. So it seems like that skill trigger must be synced with the server. Yes, that doesn't directly mean that skill trigger being banked must be connected with the server, but I think that's good enough evidence for it. So if you don't want to have to click on this Pokemon, collect all the berries, and then sit there waiting for a minute to see if it actually has a skill banked, or risk losing a skill that you actually have banked but you just didn't collect, well, there were two ways to go about this. One is you just wait there for like a minute, click on the Pokemon, and hopefully, if there is a skill trigger, it would show up. But if there is no skill trigger, you might be tapping away for another minute to make sure that you haven't actually missed anything. The second way you can do it is you just completely close the game, start it from fresh. Every time you start from fresh, the server will sync. And if there were any skill triggers, there's no risk of missing out on them. But closing the game is kind of annoying because it takes like a minute, maybe like a lot longer to open the game from a completely closed status than a minimized status. So there is another way to force the game to actually sync the skills, and that is what I said at the start of the video by going into the missions tab. There's probably something in pressing this back button and this loading screen here that forces your game data to communicate with the server to ensure that any skill triggers that you have banked will go to your Pokemon on your local game, so that when you click on the Pokemon, if there is a skill, it would then trigger. And I tested this myself several times and it's worked quite well. So my tip for you guys is, if you're going to just minimize the app, go to this screen first and then minimize the app. Or when you open the game from a minimized status, click on the missions tab, then click back before collecting the productions on your Pokemon. Alternatively, you can go through the Pokebox option you can go to edit teams or Pokebox, it should have a similar effect. But I didn't personally test this one out. I find that the missions tab's a bit easier to do. I just feel like the missions tab loads a little bit quicker. I didn't measure it, but that's what I feel. So if you're utilizing this trick, you shouldn't be finding any more skill triggers that are left behind after your productions. If you find that that's not the case, you let me know in the comments section below. But otherwise, if this video helped you, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to turn on notifications so that you get all these tips and tricks early every time I release a video.